Someone Like You by Sparkypasker, read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 23. Izuku was finding information on a drug ring when the news broke. UA had been attacked. Izuku promptly ignored the drug dealers and began watching the news. Early this afternoon, a first-year hero class at the prestigious UA High School was attacked by villains, which resulted in the death of one student and left two teachers severely wounded. According to our sources, the villain's goal was to kill All Might. The news anchor's words bounced around in Izuku's head on repeat. He snatched up his phone from where it lay next to him on the floor and immediately opened his messaging app. He quickly typed up and sent messages to Jiro, Tsu, Ojiro, Shinso, and Uraraka. He knew they were all going to UA to be heroes, but he never actually learned which classes they were in. It just hadn't ever come up in conversation. As the seconds passed by, Izuku became more and more agitated. His knee bounced as he watched the screen of his phone for the telltale dots, showing someone was answering. But they never came. His steadily growing panic was suddenly interrupted by the anchor bringing up photos of villains that had been apprehended. Izuku's panic sank into his gut. He slammed his hand over his mouth as he ran to his sink and expelled whatever bile had accumulated in his stomach. He recognized a few of the villains. The three men that were talking about getting new jobs during his first night out as a crime fighter. The woman that Izuku had done an analysis for the police on after she robbed the bank. Shigaraki Tomura. But he hadn't been caught during the attack. He had escaped. This was all Izuku's fault. If he had tried to find out more about the job the men had found, if he had tried to look into the robber more, if he had gone to the police about Shigaraki, it all could have been prevented. His friends might not have been traumatized or injured or dead. A vice squeezed itself around Izuku's lungs. He struggled to breathe, while tears cascaded out of his eyes and down his cheeks. He sank to his knees, fingertips gripping the counters tightly. The world swam, and Izuku swayed from side to side. A soft ping barely broke through the storm of pictures swimming in Izuku's mind. He released his fingers and fell onto his side onto the tatami mat floor. The pain of hitting his shoulder against the floor shocked him enough to be able to take a single deep breath. It was enough to stave off the black encroaching the sides of his vision. Another ping sounded, then another. He struggled to bring himself to his knees and crawled back to where his phone was laying next to his computer. He fell to his side again and grabbed his phone. Uraraka texted him back. She wasn't going to be back for a while, at least until school started again. Ojiro was doing okay. He said he had fought some villains, but made it out with nothing more than a few bruises. Jiro, Asui, and Shinso didn't text back. That didn't make Izuku feel any better, knowing that two of his friends were still alive, but also knowing there was a possibility that any one of his remaining three could be dead. The police were still investigating the incident and would not be releasing any information until the family was notified. He could have stopped this. He could have prevented this from happening. If only he could go back in time and fix all his mistakes. But what would he really change? What could he change? Would he go after the bank robber, knowing full well that if he helped the police with their investigation that the robber would have been released due to quirkless interference? What about the men in the alley? Would he have arrested someone for trying to get money to feed their family? That wouldn't have been good for his reputation. No one in the neighborhood would have trusted him after that. And Shigaraki? People are trying to figure out All Might's quirk every day. He wouldn't exactly be the first of Izuku's clients to try that. Izuku was absolutely useless. How did he think he could ever be able to make a difference, that he could be anything like a hero. He was just a pathetic, worthless, useless Deku. His phone pinged again. He brought it up to his eyesight. It was Jiro. She was okay, but she saw one of her teachers get torn apart by their own quirk. If Izuku was feeling more like himself, and the situation wasn't so screwed up, he would have been intrigued on how exactly that happened. As it was, he would probably find out via the news anyway. Messages from both Sue and Shinso popped up while Izuku was still looking at his phone. Izuku sobbed in relief. All of them were alive, but they were not all okay. Sue and Shinso watched their classmate die. They watched him disintegrate. They watched him get killed by Shigaraki. Shigaraki hurt them. He hurt Izuku's friends. A feeling that Izuku had only felt one time before, when he yelled at Katsuki, swelled up in his chest. The difference? The fire Izuku felt with Katsuki was from the tip of a match compared to the flaming inferno Izuku was feeling now. He sat up in front of his computer. This League of Villains is going to regret coming into existence. Izuku was going to find them and was going to stop them. Izuku was more than aware that the police were currently on the case, but he, frankly, didn't give a care. If he had to work against the police to take down these villains, he was going to do it. The League of Villains could run, but Izuku would be damned if he let them hide. Chapter 24. Aizawa was covered in bandages when he walked into the classroom. It was their first day back to class since the USJ, and nothing was quite the same. Students who would normally be out of their seats and talking with their friends were sitting in their seats and had isolated themselves. The students turned their attention to Aizawa once he stood next to the podium. Aizawa bowed. The students gasped. "Aizawa-sensei, what?" Ashidomina, a student with pink skin and hair and black sclera, asked. "Please accept my sincerest apologies. My inability to protect you forced you to protect yourselves, and in the process exposed you to one of the most difficult realities a hero has to face. There is no reason that you, as first-year hero students, should have had to go through that. For that, I am sorry." "Aizawa-sensei, no." Koda Koji, a normally quiet student with a mutation that caused his head to take on the shape of a mountain, whispered. It seemed to echo through the abnormally quiet room. Aizawa stood from his bow and took a pile of papers out of his capture scarf. "Because of the trauma you experienced, UA is offering counseling to anyone who needs it. This is a form that needs to be filled out by your parents before we are allowed to treat you. I strongly recommend that every single one of you take one." The bell rang. The students stood from their seats, and each of them grabbed a form on their way out the door. Bakugo stayed, sitting in his seat, until the last of his classmates left the room. Aizawa had been more concerned about him than any of his other students. It wasn't too unusual for Bakugo to isolate himself from the rest of the class, despite the efforts of a few of them. But what was unusual was Bakugo not popping off his quirk. At the beginning of the year, after one too many pops, Aizawa had pulled Bakugo aside, and they had had a discussion about what was appropriate and not appropriate in the classroom. Bakugo had reluctantly admitted that popping off his quirk occasionally was necessary due to the volatile chemical properties of his sweat. He had made the mistake when he was younger of allowing his sweat to gather on his hands. It had gotten onto some homework, and when a teacher started grading it while smoking a cigarette, some of the hot ashes fell onto the paper and caused a small explosion. The school never reported it and just wrote it off as a quirk accident, but Bakugo had made sure not to allow sweat to build up anymore. Since then, it was not unusual for him to set off his quirk a small amount during each class, but that day it had not happened at all. Bakugo stood from his desk and slowly walked to the podium. He picked up a form. Aizawa watched him, but didn't say anything. He was positive that if he said anything, Bakugo would put the form back on the podium and walk out without it. And out of all of his students, Bakugo needs counseling the most. And it's not only about the USJ. When Aizawa first met him, he made some worrying observations, like how he seemed to have both an inferiority and superiority complex, like how he seemed to be overly hostile towards his classmates and seemed to believe the teachers would let him get away with anything without any explanation, like how he didn't seem to have any care about how his quirk affected others. Katsuki walked through the front door of his home. He removed his shoes at the door, took his bag to his bedroom, and then took out the form Aizawa gave them. He took the piece of paper to his mother, who was doing work in her office. Before USJ happened, both Hag and Dad were on a business trip in Hokkaido. They weren't meant to come back for a week, but since UA was attacked, Hag came back and left Dad there to finish up. "I need you to sign this," he told Hag. "What is it?" she asked. "Just some consent form," he responded. Mitsuki carefully read over the form. "Pass," she sounded. "You don't need therapy." She handed the form back to Katsuki without signing it. "It's strongly recommended," Katsuki said back. "But it's not mandatory?" "No," he hesitated to say. "Then you don't need it." "How do you know?" he asked gruffly. Mitsuki smiled up at Katsuki, then stood from her chair and put her hands on his shoulders. "Because you're my son. You're so strong and confident and will make an amazing hero one day. You beat all those stupid villains to a pulp and came out without a scratch. And they were trying to kill you. You showed everyone just how strong and determined you are. There's no way someone as strong as you would need to do something as weak as go to therapy." Weak, weak, weak. All his life, he'd been told about how strong he was, and when he did something she didn't like, how weak he was. But could he really be strong when he imitated the actions of weak villains? When he beat up kids who couldn't hold a torch to him? How did defeating those who were weak make him strong? His mother wasn't going to be able to answer any of those questions, but maybe a counselor would. He looked it up once. They study psychology, and a good one would be able to give him some insight into what was going on and hopefully actually make him strong. But he wasn't going to be able to convince her to sign the consent form. Maybe Aizawa could talk to her. Katsuki came in early the next day and stood outside the teacher's lounge, wondering if he was really going to do this. He had never shown any weakness towards a teacher, but he already told Aizawa about his quirk. Maybe it would be okay to tell him about everything else, or maybe just enough to convince him to talk to his parents. Katsuki knocked on the door. It was opened only a few seconds later by President Mike. "Hey there, little listener. What's up?" he asked with a wide smile. "Is Aizawa-sensei here?" "Sure, Shota!" he yelled across the room. A caterpillar sat up from the old worn couch that was positioned in the corner of the room. He saw Katsuki standing in the doorway and unzipped the sleeping bag from the inside. Katsuki noticed he was wearing less bandages than the day before. He must have had a session with Recovery Girl. Aizawa motioned for Katsuki to follow him to an office next door to the lounge. "I am required to let you know that this room is monitored. I didn't think you would appreciate having another teacher listen in, but we are required to either have another person here when having another conversation with a student or have it recorded, and the recordings are only available through Principal Nezu. Whatever, Katsuki grumbled. Aizawa was right. He didn't necessarily want another teacher to be witness to his weakness, but he doesn't like the idea of it being on tape either. It was actually a small comfort to know that the only one who could access it would be Netsu. He had a reputation. His systems were unable to be hacked, and he had very little tolerance for those who invaded his territory. Katsuki was certain he was the lead investigator into these League of Villains extras that killed the sticky ball-headed kid. So, what did you need to talk about? Aizawa asked. Katsuki removed the consent form from his bag and gave it to Aizawa. Hag refused to sign it. She said I didn't need therapy. And? Aizawa asked, you think you do need it? Katsuki took a deep breath. What he said next could be the end of his hero career, but if he continued going the way he was going, he wasn't going to be a hero long enough to get to number 50, let alone number 1. I have made some bad decisions in the past, and I don't know how to get past them or how to fix what I did. But I know that if I don't change, if I don't try to be better, then I don't know what is going to happen. Aizawa stared at him. Katsuki could see him dissecting everything Katsuki said. And what would you like me to do? Could you talk to the hag? Maybe she will take it more seriously if it comes from a teacher. The words tasted like ashes on his tongue. He hated this, hated having to rely on someone else. The taste was actually making him feel nauseated. I'll see what I can do, Aizawa said. Katsuki took that as an invitation to quickly leave the office and run towards the restroom. He needed a few minutes to calm down before going to class. There were a couple extras in there who thought they wanted to be friends with Katsuki. But he didn't do friends. He did followers. He did minions. He did people he could control. People who wouldn't dare look down on him. People who would believe he was strong. He turned on the cold faucet, poured some water into his hands, and splashed it onto his face. He washed the sweat off his hands and stood in front of the mirror. He couldn't have friends. He didn't deserve friends. Katsuki left the bathroom and headed to class. Aizawa stood in front of the Bakugo home. The kids were in heroics class, so there was not going to be anyone around. It would be just Aizawa and Mitsuki Bakugo. Aizawa knocked on the front door. After only a minute, Mitsuki Bakugo opened the door. Oh, hello. You're the brat's teacher, right? Aizawa had a sneaky suspicion this discussion was not going to go well. That's right. If you have a few minutes, I would like to talk to you about some worrying habits I've noticed in your son's behavior and steps that can be taken to remedy this. Mitsuki looked at him questioningly. I'm not sure what kind of behavior you're talking about, but sure, come on in. She opened the door and motioned Aizawa through. Mitsuki sat in a chair in the living room while Aizawa took the couch. So, what kind of behaviors are we talking about? Mitsuki asked. Katsuki has been isolating himself from his classmates. Some of the students have tried to befriend him, but all he does is call them extras. And he has been using more force than absolutely necessary during his heroics classes. Oh, that's just Katsuki. Mitsuki laughed. Ever since he was a little kid, he always had people just follow him around. No one ever measured up to how amazing he was. In fact, there's probably no one who is as good as my boy. The kids should just take up their places as his followers and Katsuki will fall into his role. Aizawa had nothing to say to that. He had seen his share of delusional parents before, but this was something else. We are also strongly recommending all our students meet with UA's counselor due to what happened at the USJ. Katsuki doesn't need to see some shrink. He saw a classmate die. He's going to need to get used to it eventually. Might as well start now. He is only a first year. He shouldn't have to get used to it now. Aizawa was getting frustrated. What was wrong with this woman? Her son wants to see a counselor. What is so wrong with that? He is my son, Mitsuki yelled. If I say he doesn't need therapy, he doesn't need freaking therapy. He wants to see a counselor. Why would you deny him that? He's a child. He doesn't know what he wants. He's old enough to make this decision. Aizawa stood from the couch, fists clenched. You are his teacher, Mitsuki said, seething. Nothing more. If you keep pushing this, I will take Katsuki out of UA. He can become a hero at any number of other schools. Aizawa took a deep breath. That won't be necessary. Have a good day. He couldn't stay around any longer. If he stayed there, he was going to hit her, and then he would lose his license and not be able to help Bakugo at all. Mitsuki followed him to the front door and said nothing as she slammed the door after he left. Aizawa got into his car and turned it on. He went through some breathing exercises to calm himself down before he started driving. The last thing he needed was to get arrested for road rage. Before he started driving, there was a call he needed to make. Aizawa, how did the visit go? The voice of Nedzu filtered through the speaker on his phone. That woman is infuriating. Ah, I guess that means she refused? Yeah, under the claim that he didn't need to see a counselor, despite him expressing the desire to. That's too bad. I believe Bakugo could really benefit from a few meetings with Hound Dog. Is there anything we can do to force her to consent to the treatment? As satisfactory as that may be, there is nothing we can do. Psychiatric care is not considered a necessary medical treatment. This is not the same thing as her denying medical care for a severe infection or a treatable condition. And his mother said if we kept pushing on him getting some therapy, that she would remove him from UA. Then we really only have one choice. We will have to respect his mother's wishes. We can't allow Bakugo to leave UA. If he does, he will lose any and all support he would have to become an effective hero. So all we can do right now is be there for him. Yeah. End of chapter.